Thumbs up. Very good. I now welcome representatives from Monash University, Deakin University and the University of Adelaide via video conference. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to parliamentary committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? And we'll start with Monash University.
Sharon Pickering, Vice-Chancellor and President, Monash University.
Welcome.
Ian Martin, Vice-Chancellor, Deakin University.
Welcome. And then online, I believe, University of Adelaide.
Yes, John Williams, Provost, University of Adelaide, and Professor Peter Hoyes en route.
En route, did you say?
Yes.
Okay, no worries. All right, we'll now invite you to make an opening statement, and at the conclusion of them, we'll open up for questions, and we'll start in the same order. We'll go with Monash University.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. In September, I remarked to the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Legislation Committee that since October 7, I have never before witnessed the anguish I have seen written on the faces of my colleagues and of my students. We have learned much in these past 14 months as we have worked with unwavering commitment, dedicated resources and clarity of university purpose to combat rising anti-Semitism with concerted action. We continue to do that as a university community and as a valued part of broader communities. Expectations of staff and student conduct have been clear, defensible and enforced. We did not permit those outside our community to use our campus as a site for political agitation or worse. It is neither appropriate nor desirable to suppress speech that is merely offensive, but we have repeatedly taken action against speech that was harmful, whether harassing or vilifying or otherwise prescribed. And we took action against those who crossed the line, both within and beyond our university community. We worked with Victoria Police throughout and sought expert advice where necessary. We maintained all operations of the university and community events, and we responded to everyone who sought a response. Since that time, we have taken the opportunity to make amendments to strengthen regulations, policies and procedures where they were needed. We worked as a whole university, a university that enjoys what we understand to be the largest Jewish population and one of the largest Muslim populations of any Australian university. At the heart of everything we did, and we continue to do, is genuine dialogue. Monash began its work on our approach to working with students long before October 7 last year. My predecessors had established a Vice-Chancellor's Forum where elected student leaders come together with the Vice-Chancellor and other members of the senior executive. Most importantly, immediately following October 7, I met with leaders of the Monash Jewish Student Society and the Australasian Union of Jewish Students. We asked them what they needed, and we took all available steps to meet those needs. Importantly, those student leaders specifically and repeatedly asked that all students affected by the conflict should also benefit from more flexible academic arrangements and other measures taken to help Jewish students. Because we were also working with other leading student organisations, we were able to do that. Members and senators, peace or social cohesion is not the absence of conflict or an encampment. Universities cannot settle for students and colleagues not offending or harming one another, even though on our worst days that can seem like quite a lofty ambition. Universities must instead fulfil their purpose. They exist to develop the leaders of tomorrow and the evidence, the mechanisms and the processes to resolve intractable conflicts, to move forward during the deepest disagreement, to create the foundations of responsibility, accountability and justice, and to realise those vital principles. Most of all, universities are places where we come up with the ideas and ways to do what seems unimaginable or impossible anywhere else. So universities have both the opportunity and the responsibility to combat anti-Semitism, and to do so in ways that build campus and social cohesion and that prepare our students and our colleagues for the active roles they take in this society and beyond in resolving conflict and building peace. For I have great expectations of and faith in my colleagues and in my students as the future leaders of this world in the great tradition of both Sir John Monash and of the university. Delivering meaningful change requires more than words of condemnation. It requires tangible actions. It requires engagement with those who may be disenfranchised, and particularly with those who are and will be most affected by the decisions taken. It requires us to bring people together when every pressure is to stay apart. That is why we announced back in May an initial $1 million investment for the Campus Cohesion Initiative, co-led by Associate Professor David Sluky and Dr Susan Carland. This work involves an interdisciplinary team to investigate anti-Semitism, Islamophobia and related prejudice, and to develop and test programs that support cohesion across Monash's campuses, with potential application to other contexts. It is why we have supported the development of the Monash Initiative for Rapid Research into Anti-Semitism that involves a series of short, discrete research projects, each examining a specific area of endeavour, such as government, education or the media, to establish how to identify, counteract and prevent anti-Semitism. It is why we are supporting Dr Dan Haller and Dr Farid Zaid and the Brave Conversations Lab that brings together experts in history, philosophy, education, psychology and neuroscience with students and teachers to engage courageously in meaningful and constructive conversations about the most pressing issues of our time. Just last week, more than 60 academics from across Monash were involved in just this training. It is why we trained and are continuing to train our university leadership and frontline personnel on anti-Semitism. Throughout all of this, we have maintained dialogue with students and staff, even when some have walked away and found it too difficult. We will maintain ways for every student and colleague to continue dialogue in whatever way they can, and we are striving to find new ways to increase the numbers who participate and the depth of their engagement. Our unwavering and abiding commitment is to listen and to engage deeply and to move forward. The future generation of leaders needs to see us, all of us here, demonstrate that countering prejudice is not a zero-sum game and that peace is not the absence of conflict, but rather that social cohesion is a process that we must all work to build and maintain. While clear and defensible boundaries and their enforcement are foundational, and the safety of colleagues and students are non-negotiable, the real work of the university is the active, often incremental support and engagement of all academics, professional staff and students in deep understanding, in the daily cultivation of human and intellectual curiosity in one another, in the value of evidence, in a pedagogy of care and in an abiding commitment to a future that is better than today. And I finish by noting it was Sir John Monash himself that remarked, "The best hope for Australia is the ballot box and a good education." Thank you.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. Professor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair and Senators. Let me say first, gathering as we do just days after the despicable terrorist firebombing of the Adas Israel Synagogue and the attacks in Sydney, that such acts may have occurred in Australia is a dark marker indeed. Those atrocities merit nothing but our total commitment as leaders in civil society to root out anti-Semitism wherever it may fester. And, as I said in my opening remarks to the hearings of this inquiry's predecessor, Deakin University unequivocally condemns the rise of anti-Semitism we have witnessed over the past 12 months. Such prejudice and hatred is abhorrent and has no place in a modern multicultural Australian society. It must be that simple. From the moment of the October 7th attacks, carried out by terrorists, to the destruction, pain and sadness and loss that has followed, it has been a time that has tested the very foundations of our society, our humanity, and the will to find cohesion and strength in our national story. It's also been a time where we've witnessed an ugliness arise across our nation, where anger has too often given way to vitriol and hatred. And for Deakin, this period has tested us in ways never before experienced, indeed perhaps ways never envisaged by those who've sat in my seat previously. The events and experiences of the Deakin community throughout has brought myself and our leadership team both tremendous hope and abject dismay. Acting and reacting as we have at all times, we have sought to balance that right to a public discourse on the most trying and emotionally fraying of issues, those contentious to many, with the equal and absolute right of a campus open and safe for all. A campus where the battle is between ideas, not between ourselves, and most of all, where a battle in the truest sense of academic spirit is upheld, rather than acrimony, where the cloud of anti-Semitism loos. I do not proclaim we've done everything perfectly, far from it. But I and we welcome being here as a chance to discuss the facts and the way forward, putting to rest much misreporting and diffusion that various actors have sought to exploit in service of their agenda. Exploit, knowing full well the limitations of the university, to correct the record. As I and our team have made clear as possible throughout this trying period, in the white-hot light of current events, the cherished right to protest and political speech, a right that occupies a deserved pedestal in our democracy, must be protected. But so too must a campus free of prejudice. Both before these current events, under the spotlight of this committee, and subsequently, Deakin has worked assiduously to ensure our policies and procedures are fit for purpose. At Deakin, we pay close regard to the principles of the IHRA International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, and at the same time we are now working collegially to develop a shared definition as referenced by my colleagues last week. This was our first experience as a university of such encampments, and while our processes often held up well, we have learnt much to change policies where needed and to be better prepared and ready to respond in the future. As universities, we should and must be shining lights of example. As we witness anti-Semitism rise, we must set the standard through our actions and living our deals in practice and not merely using words. That is what we have sought to do. In our own actions, through working with colleagues and more recently engaging with the Special Envoy, have all led to invaluable gains for us. I welcome any and all meaningful, practical and well-intentioned work in this space and really look forward to trusting this committee to play a positive role in taking this forward. But as I did in the previous inquiry hearings, I close on the note that universities are just one part of a society witness to too great a rise in hatred. The collapse of social cohesion and the race of too many to the most extreme positions when they are unable to even contemplate the intrinsic worth and humanity of those who think differently is a cancer to any free, pluralistic and multicultural nation. How universities such as Deakin work with our partners to tackle this scourge should rightfully be front and centre, as must the work of our wider community, civic actors and parliaments. As I wrote in a recent op-ed, the ease and anonymity with which actors of ill intent were able to harness the power of social media to divide our community and feed a sense of prejudice and opposition to any shared ties that bind was stark and profoundly troubling. Comfort in social cohesion must never be complacency in social cohesion and shared values. For our society, that presents a dark path to chart, and for a university, it is an affront to our purpose of knowledge and education. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Martin. University of Adelaide.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to acknowledge that we are joining from the lands of the Kaurna people, where our university campuses are located, and we regret very much not to be there with you in person, as we currently have stepped out from a university council meeting that is in progress. The University of Adelaide recognises anti-Semitism as an enduring and harmful attitude towards Jewish people that must not be tolerated in our free and democratic country. The university continues to be deeply troubled by the reported increase in anti-Semitic conduct in Australia and indeed worldwide. We remain committed to addressing such conduct on our campuses as effectively as possible. The university welcomes the opportunity to provide feedback to the inquiry and to outline some of the matters that are taking place at the University of Adelaide. Like my colleagues, the university condemns anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. As a member of the Group of Eight, we have been actively involved in the Group of Eight's collaborative work with Special Envoy Ms. Gillian de Gaulle, AO, to create a working definition of anti-Semitism for use at Australian universities. This was spoken about in detail at the 29th of November hearing by Vicky Thompson, the Chief Executive of the Group of Eight. To highlight some of the actions taken by the university this year, we have replaced our old student misconduct rules with a student code of conduct and a new student misconduct policy. We worked with our Jewish community to implement measures to foster a safer and supportive environment. And we have ensured a robust, safer campus community complaint process to provide a pathway for reporting any concerns or complaints about the behaviour and conduct of others within the university community. It is also worth noting that in 2022, the university established an integrity unit, a specialist unit where complaints can be raised through the Safer Campus community reporting process, both anonymously and as an identified complainant. The integrity unit manages complex and sensitive issues, including anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination. Our goal is to create a working definition of anti-Semitism that is suitable for the Australian context, drawing on existing published definitions. The G of 8 has in its work drawn on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and recommendations of anti-Semitism task forces at Columbia University, Stanford University, Harvard University, and New York University. It will align the language and considerations relevant to Australia while also respecting lawful freedom of speech and academic freedom. An agreed definition of anti-Semitism will assist the university to deliver and inform best practice in our policies and procedures. We deeply understand that anti-Semitism is a broader societal issue that extends beyond university campuses, and we are committed to working closely with our stakeholders to address anti-Semitism in our universities and wider society. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Professor. I'm going to start with Professor Pickering, and then I'll come to you, Professor Hoy. Professor Pickering, one thing you mentioned in your opening statement, which really stood out to me, was your engagement with students. Can you talk about how Monash University, and specifically yourself as the Vice-Chancellor, engages with not just the Jewish students, but students affected by the conflict overseas?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. In the days following October 7, I actually wasn't the Vice-Chancellor. At that stage, I was the interim provost, but in that role, we reached out to the Monash Jewish Student Society, otherwise known as Monjas, and invited them in for a meeting in order to understand what was happening, what they were experiencing, what they were seeing, but particularly what they needed. Really, it was about us relying on them and their experience within their own community to define what the issues were and define what was needed. They requested a range of things, not a particularly large range, and to be frank, not a particularly significant range, but they were in essence accommodations for students who at that stage were heading in towards exams. Yeah. They described students who were afraid, particularly to come on public transport to come to campus, and also who were simply carrying a very significant burden in the days and weeks following October 7. And so simply managing that in that moment. And so we made a series of accommodation. The president of Monjas at that time, and indeed the vice president, were both quite extraordinary. And they said, we do not wish for any of these provisions to be solely the preserve of Jewish students, any student, because by that stage it was clear there was going to be an unfolding conflict, that they would be available to everyone. We continued to meet with those students. I have met with them multiple times, both in that previous role and then as my role as Vice-Chancellor, but also the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education has taken on the role of also engaging with them. From recollection, we had over the period around about a dozen formal meetings with that group, and we also had a series of other meetings with affected registered student societies at the university at that time to make sure that we were doing everything we could to meet their needs as well.
Just to be clear, so roughly since October 7, including yourself as a Vice-Chancellor, university leadership has had around a dozen meetings with Jewish students.
Yeah, well, that'd be a dozen formal meetings, and there'd be plenty of phone calls, informal contacts, emails, etc. on top of that. I don't have a quantity with that, but it would be a not insignificant number.
And the point of those meetings was really to ask students, what do you need? How can we support you? How can we help get you through this period?
That's exactly right.
Okay. And then obviously, not just the Jewish students are affected by this, this terrible conflict. I mean, you would have similar engagement with students who are from the Islamic community or from the Palestinian community as well.
That's right. So we have had, we've worked through a range of registered student societies, and we've attempted to engage throughout that period. Some of those engagements have been more successful than others, and we've also maintained very strong engagement with the peak student representative bodies in the student associations, and that's been both through formal meetings but also informal contact.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Monash University was the first university to dismantle the encampments in Australia, or one of the first?
I would have to check the exact time frame on that, but we had an encampment that ran from May the 1st to May the 17th.
And what can you attribute to the way in which you were able to dismantle the encampments? How did you do it?
So first I should be clear, we did not dismantle the encampment. The students who were encamped there decided to pack up. What we saw, and I think it's important, that none of our registered student societies were engaged in the encampment at Monash. They were different configurations of students that were there. We were very clear. The first few days of that encampment were deeply unpleasant, and we saw some unacceptable and unpleasant behaviour. We took a series of steps in relation to that, and that included, if you like, two key groups. Student actors, so students of Monash that were involved in behaviour that we believe crossed the line, and then, if you like, non-students or members that weren't part of our community. For members that weren't part of the community, we formally excluded 7 of those people from our campus, and they are not permitted to ever come back onto our campus. We temporarily excluded at least another 20 actors that came onto our campus during that period. In addition to that, 11 students were subject to misconduct proceedings. While those proceedings were underway, they were not permitted to return to the encampment site of the university without further penalty. So I would attribute a couple of things. It had perhaps a different level of engagement than was the case in other contexts. The way in which we managed misconduct, and particularly external actors, perhaps differed. I think that the provisions we put around those students affected during the disciplinary proceedings were a little different, and it would be remiss of me if I didn't remark that our geographical location probably played some part as well.
Thanks, Professor. I'm going to just take a broader question. And the Deputy Chair asked one before, which I think is an important question around the systemic nature of anti-Semitism. And you mentioned in your opening statement that you've got the largest Jewish population. For full transparency, I used to be one of the students at Monash University. How systemic do you believe anti-Semitism is at universities, and including at Monash University as well?
I believe anti-Semitism is systemic in Australian society, of which universities are a part. It is impossible we would have seen a synagogue burned and cars burned in the past week if it was not systemic.
Thanks, Vice-Chancellor. I'm going to go to the Professor Hoy. That's how you pronounce your name, Professor?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, apologies if it was mispronounced. Professor,
Perfect.
How many times have you met with Jewish students?
I have not met with Jewish students to my recollection, partly because we are in the midst of a university merger where we're merging the University of South Australia and the University of Adelaide, in addition to looking after our foundation universities. But I have had my senior staff with Jewish students on several occasions.
So because the university merged with South Australia, you chose not to meet with Jewish students?
It wasn't that I cannot remember having been asked to personally meet with them, but I think that is likely. The decision we made was to make sure that a meeting could be in place very early. And I also understand that my staff have been incredibly responsive, including our provost, John Williams, who's joining with me here today.
So you would get regular reports from your senior administrators on their meetings with Jewish students?
We, during the whole period, had a very large incident management group that met every day. There would have been in the order of 15 people on that group, devoting hours daily on trying to manage this situation to ensure that no one in campus were harmed during the encampment period. And I got regular feedback on that. and most of the day is happening.
And has there been any incidents of concern on campus around anti-Semitism?
Yes, I mean, our Jewish students have raised concerns with the university.
How many times?
Sorry?
How many times?
I cannot tell you exactly how many times that has happened. Perhaps I could help you there if I may.
I'm trying to make sure we just because we've got the virtual video thing. So I'm just going to just ask a question, then I'll let you answer. Professor Williams. So I'll come back to you in a second, Professor Williams. So is it possible for the university to come back to the committee outlining the number of times that Jewish students has raised concerns with the university?
Yes, that should be possible, absolutely.
Thank you. Professor Williams.
Look, thank you very much. And I should say, as the Vice Chancellor said, I also had the opportunity to meet with the Jewish Community Council of South Australia, including the Australasian Union of students during the height of the encounter in May, and also met with the 5AA group as well during the thing. In terms of during misconduct events during the encampment, we had 9 events, 9 reports related to 9 individuals. We had 23 reports relating to 9 individuals, 2 members of the public and 7 members of school. So the 2 members of the public using the authority of the university and policy and procedures have been excluded indefinitely from the university campus. They're not welcome. And now in terms of the 9 students during that event, the misconducts were taken. 1 student was issued with an interim exclusion and was referred to the student conduct tribunal, and that conduct was considered and a sanction was provided. And in the case of 6 other students, there was a formal process taken, but there was no formal finding of misconduct. These were misconducts. These were not anti-Semitic activities.
Professor Williams, I'm very sorry. We're having a little bit of trouble with the audio, and there's not much we can do. But Professor Hoy, you were a bit clearer. I'm not sure if the microphone is sort of closer to you or something like that. But if you perhaps, perhaps for the benefit of the committee, if you can provide the details of the engagement and the complaints with the committee on notice, Professor Williams, that would be very much appreciated. But I'm going to come back. I'm coming back to the Vice Chancellor, Professor Hoy. So, are you aware of the incident on the 4th of August? I believe it was 2022, where there was an article published in the ONDIT student magazine.
Yes, I'm certainly aware of that.
Pardon?
I'm certainly aware of that.
Okay. And then you're aware that on the 1st of September, following that article, the Jewish students went to the Student Representative Council where they were asking for the removal of that article, which clearly had incendiary and I mean, I can read out some of the things, but I don't think it's particularly helpful. But it was a clearly anti-Semitic article and a clearly incendiary article, where they asked to have it removed from the internet. Are you aware of what happened at that student council meeting?
No, and it's that was one of the times where I was on leave. There was an acting vice chancellor, but it was taken very, very seriously by the university. Obviously, on D is part of our student union, which is not directly controlled by the university. But sure, we work very hard to try to settle the uncomfortable fallout from that article, which of course we as a university would see as.
Let's be more transparent. The article originally said, "Glory to the Intifada, glory to the resistance, death to Israel, and inshallah it will be merciless." Jewish students go to a student union meeting. They were then taunted, laughed at, and had an outright dismissal of their concern. Students were screaming death to Israel in their faces. Other council members ridiculed them when they asked the SRC to refrain from speaking on behalf of Jews. I mean, it was a pretty serious incident. One student had a panic attack and had trouble sleeping. Was the university aware of this incident?
I'm sure we were aware of. Yes, we were, and we.
Did you get a report about it, Professor?
Sorry?
Did you get a report about it?
I was aware when I came back from leave that these things were happening. The university has been very upset about the publication of that particular article. Was not legally in a position to do anything about it. The article has subsequently been retracted, but it took far too long to happen.
So I'm just trying to get a picture here, Professor. You were on leave, you come back, there's been this incident at the University of Adelaide where Jewish students are screamed at after trying to engage in a student process. You get told about it. Your first thought is not to go, well, maybe I'll sit down and see how the Jewish students are and I'll talk to them myself?
I did not do that, but we have staff at
why didn't you do that?
Level that have been very engaged.
Sure, but you're the vice chancellor, Professor. Why didn't you do that?
I believe that others were doing that very well. It was not an active decision not to do it. I wasn't asked to do it. In hindsight, if you tell me that I should actually have sought out those students, I would have to agree with you that would have been a better course of action than having my very experienced engaging with the students.
Yeah. I'm more just trying to understand, Professor. I mean, we had evidence from Monash University where since October 7, there's been 12 engagements directly with university leadership, many other informal engagements. The engagements weren't to, to deal with a particular incident that you were made aware of. They were a proactive engagement with students to try and ensure that there is, some sort of effort to work with students that wasn't just relating to Jewish students either. And I'm just interested as to why you didn't do that and why you haven't prioritised that and why your university have had incidents like this and it wasn't enough to prompt you to reach out to Jewish students.
We have had an enormous amount of reach out to Jewish students, but it has happened at my provost or deputy level and not at my level personally. And in hindsight, maybe that should have happened, but delegating it to them was a way of accelerating the reach out. And we have, when the students have come and asked us for certain accommodations, we have very quickly made accommodations to the students, such as finding places that feel that they can safely exist on campus.
Professor, what about? So also, did the Jewish students at Adelaide ever directly ask for a meeting with you?
I cannot recall that. It is possible that I have, and we will come back to you on that.
It may be worth checking on whether on Wednesday, the 31st of August 2022, that you were asked of a meeting personally, and if there are any other incidents where you were personally asked of a meeting. Because then your evidence before about actively deciding not to meet with them would be not true.
Sorry, I never want to be untruthful, so if there's anything that has to be cleared up, I would like to clear it up now.
All right, if we can check that there wasn't any specific requests of Jewish students meeting with you, including on the 31st of August 2022 and others, that would be very much appreciated. And I'd ask you again, maybe for the benefit of the committee, have you ever actively decided that you weren't going to meet with Jewish students?
I do not know. It's possible that I have, and I thought I gave that answer before.
Okay. Vice-Chancellor.
Clearly, if there has been a request on Wednesday, August 22, to meet with me, and it hasn't happened, there must have been an active decision for me not to meet with.
Okay. That's a different answer. That's a different answer to before, but we'll move on. What about?
I'm very clear that if there were a different answer before, it was because I didn't formulate myself well. Quite clearly, if there was a request for me to meet with Jewish students and it didn't happen, I must have made an active decision to not meet with them. If I were alerted to that request, that date is one where I likely was not even Vice-Chancellor, would have been acting Vice-Chancellor on that day.
Professor, what about, and if you can come back to us if there were any other direct requests from Jewish student leaders to meet with you directly, that would be very useful. What about other incidents? I mean, obviously, how do you track anti-Semitism on campus?
Through very, very close contact and outreach from many people in our Division of Academic and Student Engagement. We are in constant contact with the student union, which we don't control, going back to the OND issue. And we also, of course, have established an integrity unit where, as I said in my opening remarks, where people can make anonymous complaints. And we take that very, very seriously.
And what
exactly to enable students to make their concerns known to us.
I have had reports that the integrity unit is an important and a good unit. And what have they found, Professor?
Well, they have found that clearly that there is concern. Some students have said that they don't feel safe on campus. I can understand why that is. To my knowledge, in the complaints that have been made, there has been no direct finding of anti-Semitic behaviour in those investigations. Again, I would have to come back to you to verify that this is a correct statement. But there has been findings, as Professor Williams has said before, about people being disruptive in their behaviour on campus.
Has there been an increase in anti-Semitic activities since October 7 at the University of Adelaide?
After the encampment, we have seen a decline in complaints from students. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been an increase in anti-Semitic behaviour, but as judged by the number of complaints that we've had, we would have to judge that there hasn't been.
Do your staff, have you met with any Jewish staff about this, Professor?
No, I haven't met with any Jewish staff knowingly.
Okay.
I would like to put on the record that we took enormous care during the encampment to make the university as safe as at all possible. As I said, we have an incident management group that met every day. It took an enormous amount of resources. I directed an enormous amount of resources towards managing this situation and towards making sure that students felt as safe as they possibly could under those difficult conditions.
How do you transparently report about your activity in terms of dealing with complaints?
We do that transparently through our People and Culture Committee, which is a subcommittee of our council.
And how does that work?
What do you mean, how does it work?
Well, you said we do it through our committee, so I'm just understanding how do you do it?
So the Integrity Unit will regularly provide a report to our People and Culture Committee, which then at a subsequent council meeting reports what happened on that committee, as is common practice for subcommittees. Secondly, we also have annual reports about student misconduct matters presented to the council, for the council to have an oversight of how we're tracking. And obviously, in a student body of some 30,000 students and maybe 7,000 staff in the payroll, there will be, on an annual basis, a number of complaints about behaviour that complainants find undesirable. But I would have to say it's a very small number relative to the big body of individuals that we have in our community.
Sure. So how do you instill confidence in the community and in students by outlining publicly the outcomes of the complaint processes?
To the extent that it's possible for us to outline the outcome of individual processes.
I'm not asking for an individual case. I'm asking for, if someone makes a complaint, the university has a choice. Do they either outline, and as part of your complaints process, the university has a choice. Do we say, here's how many complaints there were, this is the outcomes, make that publicly available so that if students want to make a complaint in the future, they can know that that's going to be taken seriously and there's some sort of transparency and accountability measure. And I'm asking you, Professor, how do you do that? Yeah. There's a committee that you mentioned, but I'm still unclear as to whether or not you do any transparency measures.
Transparency measures, for example, we publish now annually publicly a report on all the incidents and complaints that we have against sexual harassment and misconduct. That's a new development that we have just published and made public. In terms of our incidents and of complaints and outcomes that we are not making publicly available.
So, okay, this is my last question and then I'll hand over to the Deputy Chair. So if you can come back to us with the number of times that students have requested to meet with the university, specifically yourself, Vice-Chancellor, that would be very useful. It would be also very useful. I don't want the names of individual complaints. Right? I don't want to infringe on anyone's privacy, and let me make that very clear. But if there have been complaints, it would be very useful to know how many complaints there have been made and the outcomes of those complaints, and what's happened to them, and what the plan is for the university to ensure that those complaints, or that complaints process is made public in the future. Is that possible?
Of course, it's possible to come back to you, and we will do so.
Thanks very much, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are to Professor Pickering and Professor Martin, just in relation to the encampments. It seems that both your universities were very quick to act on the encampments and seem to have them, packed down fairly quickly. And it seems to me, from looking just briefly then at the public statements that were made and the media coverage surrounding them, that the university didn't actually provide any concessions to the protesters or the if you call them that, those involved in the encampment. Is that correct?
We worked in a committed fashion to, first of all, ensure that we did all the things that the university needs to do in terms of our operations, but also deeply respecting the right to protest, but making sure that boundaries were not crossed in terms of our established codes of codes of conduct. As I mentioned to you before, the encampment at Monash was not led by one of our registered student associations. So when demands were made of us, we suggested to those students they should direct their concerns through the registered student societies, and as a result of that, they were not brought forward to us.
Okay. And
so no
concession. No. And was that the experience at Deakin as well?
So from very early on in the encampment, we erected a barrier around the encampment and provided pathways for students to take that would provide a path away so that they did not feel threatened.
Was I right in reading, Professor, that I imagine the encampment was in a major thoroughfare?
It was in a major thoroughfare, and we were lucky that where it was that we were able to provide alternative pathways. We focused on making sure that the campus was as safe as possible, reflected on health and safety legislation where we needed to, and the campus lasted from the 7th to the 24th of May. That it was taken down by the students themselves. We didn't have to forcibly take it down, but no concessions were made.
Okay, because it's concerning to me that a lot of the universities produced joint statements or made other concessions that some of them have financial implications for the university, others involve concessions around enrolments, but it seems that others were able to do it in a way that didn't require any concession.
We took the view that there are ways of engaging with the university through our well-established, very well-run Students' Association where democratically elected representatives could take the part. There are elected student members of our academic board and our governing body. Again, that provides a democratic way for that student voice. And we, again, as Monash did, encourage them to use that path if they wish to raise grievances, not go down another path.
Well, that's right. But if the outcome of establishing an encampment and issuing demands, and then that's acquiesced to by the university, wouldn't that just encourage future behaviour like that in the future?
That was a view that Deakin took. It's impossible to comment on the management decision made by other institutions, but that was absolutely our view.
Okay. And just for you, Professor Martin, on I've got information on an incident here in which and this came to us through the Executive Council of Australian Jury, that a student at the university felt threatened by an incident. I won't outline the phrase that was used, but repeatedly shouted at the student, and I'm sure you're aware of the incident. But the student involved, I understand, was suspended, but then the suspension was overturned. Do you want to, without...
So I won't name, but I can go into non-name details. So the language that was chanted was utterly unacceptable. And when I became aware of the video, I publicly and to the entire Deakin University condemned that action. And having identified the student went into our misconduct process on the basis of what was clearly unacceptable language used. The initial complaint procedure went through and there was a penalty for the student on the basis of that unacceptable behaviour. There was an appeal by the student on procedural grounds, and I don't want to go into the exact details, but the finding of unacceptable behaviour was substantiated. That was not retracted, and I think that's a really important part of this. For complex reasons which related to a penalty that had already partly been served, the second penalty was different.
Okay. How long was that process at Deakin? So from complaint being made, was there a complaint that was made, or was it something that the university initiated off its own bat?
We initiated that. Okay. Having been made aware of video evidence of the event, we initiated that.
Okay. And from that point, from your initiation to, I understand a suspension was issued. We won't worry about whether it was overturned or not, but how long was that process?
So the first hearing was on the 5th of June, and I'm just sorry, I'm going to have to make reference to a series of letters.
Sorry.
19th of June.
Wow. Okay. That seems to stand in stark contrast to a lot of the evidence that we've had from other universities about the length of their processes. So if you're taking action immediately like that, that sends a very strong message that that behaviour isn't tolerated, and also sends a strong message to the Jewish students on your campus that that the university is taking it very seriously, and that they're individuals who are undertaking that sort of activity aren't welcome.
So we have a process to student complaints that says if a complaint is raised, immediate response is given, and that's usually within 24 hours. Obviously, if it comes in on a Saturday morning, it might be 48, 72. Mm-hmm. But we work to make sure that all complaints are dealt with within a 20-day period.
Wow. And
now, it's not always possible to do that, because some of them are complex and rely on evidence, and some of them cross over things like the longer Christmas break. But the target of the team is to manage them within 20 days because of the significance of dealing with this in a timely matter, a timely way.
Thank you. I think that's fantastic, and I think that, well, I'll save the commentary for the report, shall I?
Sure. Okay. Thank you all for appearing before the committee, for the giving of your time today, and for the evidence that you've given to the committee. The committee requests that answers to questions on notice are provided to the committee secretariat by close of business 13 January 2025. We are going to suspend the committee for about 15 minutes, and we'll come back with the next hearing. But thanks again.